I'm gonna give a tutorial on MedMij, which is our Dutch PHR structure. I first have one small slide about me to introduce myself. I'm Ardon Toonstra and I work at FHIR. I'm mostly a FHIR profiler. And as such, I have an assignment already for like 1.5 years at MedMij, at NICTIS, where I am involved in creating the FHIR specifications needed for MedMij. And that's also the reason why I can talk about MedMij this moment. So actually, another colleague of mine, Martin Smith, would have done this presentation, but unfortunately he is not here, so I'm taking over. So, okay, let's go to MedMij with the personal health data in the palm of your hand. A very nice slogan, catchy. So I'm actually very curious, how many from you are already familiar with MedMij? Can you already rate like half? And how much of you are Dutch? Okay, but we also have some non-Dutchies here in the room. So for the ones who are familiar with MedMij, probably a lot of my slides were already being, you've already seen a couple of those slides because MedMij is already, for 3 years now, doing a lot of marketing around and brand awareness around MedMij and spreading the word. So you will probably see some. But I will first cover still like the whole, what is MedMij, what is a personal health environment or personal health record, and why we would need it. Then I will go into a little bit more into the depth of the 3 different projects MedMij consists of, the 3 products it delivers. So we will go through the framework, to the standards, which is the project I'm working at, and I will briefly say something about finance. And while we're here at DevDays, I think the most important part is the hands-on session, because that will be, I think, new, because at the moment MedMij is evolving and we already have a lot. So we have a MedMij compliant server with a lot of data where you can request a couple of, you can request information from it. And we have a touchstone environment available, which we use for qualification purposes. And well, we got Richard here as well. So we will, you can explore the qualification environment for MedMij. And we also have a access gateway powered by Verkozen and VZVZ, where you can actually retrieve medical information from the Dutch exchange point. But I will get to that at the end of the presentation, and I'm hoping that a lot of you will try to explore FHIR in the context of MedMij. So first, we're going to go through MedMij. And what we have seen over the last couple of years, that there are an increasingly growing number of people that are actually interested in their healthcare data. And there are also, well, there are so many more devices around here, and you know all the presentations about all the Internet of Things and all the data that's there. So there are also every day popping up more apps and websites that can help you with those healthcare data. But if you now think about your own healthcare data, how many places is it stored? Like, just give it a thought for a second. And how many places are your health data being stored in other systems? Well, it's probably quite a lot. So, like in the beginning of MedMij, we had a tweet from the SAR who was thinking about it as well and also decided to tweet about it. And for her, she found out that she had like 3 hospitals and a couple of paramedics, a general practitioner that all have her medical data. And this is actually where a personal health environment or a personal health record comes in, because it would be so very nice to just collect all your healthcare data all around and put it in one place which you own, and where you can pull everything towards you, so you can be in control. So that's what a personal health environment actually is, or a personal health record, because I will use these words alongside each other, and they will also be used both in the slides. So it's not really consistent, but I think they mean the same. So a personal health environment is actually a tool to collect, manage, and share your health data. Come on. This should give patients peace of mind and also helps in building their confidence about their own health status. Because in the end, it's a bit slow. A personal health environment should empower a patient with his health data. It should give patients, put patients in charge, and in the end, a patient will always know the best about his own body and how it will react. So that's why personal health environments can be important. So in the beginning of MedMij, there was some research conducted on what the Dutch people actually want, and these are the results. So almost 70% of the people in the Netherlands are actually interested in their medical files. And we see that 60% of the Dutch people would like to have a personal health environment. And another interesting result was that in a panel research, a lot of patients said that when they checked their healthcare data in the electronic health system from the healthcare provider, that they saw things that were wrong or were not correct. So if you put a patient in charge of your healthcare data and you put it towards you, you can also have a patient that can check your healthcare provider. Well, this research was conducted by the Patient Federation in the Netherlands, and they also asked on which subjects were most important for getting access to or getting to your personal health record. And well, the first two are actually your lab results and well, getting your medication in your control. While, for example, the results for keeping track of your health in a diary were more ambiguous. So the green is very important, the red less important. So what does MedMij actually do to get all those personal health records? For that, MedMij created a couple of very nice and very short animations, which I would like to show. It's only 1 minute and 20 seconds, so don't worry. And I think that animation is in English, and it says, or it states what MedMij does very well. So hang on, because here we go.
More and more people are interested in actively managing their health data, using the increasing numbers of health-related apps and websites. These developments are commendable, but at how many locations is our health data actually stored? Hospitals, municipalities, general practitioners, pharmacies, the gym, the list goes on and on. Having all this information in a single location makes it easier to manage, share, and use. This offers peace of mind, confidence, and greater insight, and lets you gain an overall picture of your health. MedMij makes sure that a personal health environment like an app and the systems at care organisations are able to communicate with each other safely and use the same language. MedMij sets the rules. The systems in healthcare environments and at care organisations must also meet the requirements set by MedMij, enabling partners affiliated with MedMij to share health-related information from different sources effectively, safely, and confidentially. MedMij gives you greater control of your health, as well as a more complete picture. You can learn more at medmij.nl.
So that gives a good view of what MedMij actually does, but I will have a couple of slides more on elaborating on it. So MedMij sets itself a target, and that is to enable everyone in the Netherlands, or at least in the Netherlands, to have access to a personal health environment. And not just a personal health environment, it should also be filled with health data, and you should have free choice between personal health environments. So it's not just one. It's very important to state that MedMij itself will not develop or implement a personal health environment. Rather, it will set the rules and will make sure that privacy and security is all regulated and it's all safe. So within MedMij, it's very important to know that we actually have two domains. We have the person's domain here on the right side, or the left side of the screen, and the healthcare provider domain, and they are represented by service providers in the framework. So you've got a PHR, can have a service provider, can be the same, and MedMij only governs about those service providers. So that's where the whole framework is about. And well, the whole main task is to enable and promote the digital exchange of personal health data between patients and professionals, like what we already said, in a very safe and user-friendly and affordable way. So as I already said in the beginning, MedMij has a couple of different projects. One of them is the MedMij framework, which should enable the trust and the security of data exchange. There's a project that concerns about standardization and interoperability, about which content actually flows over the MedMij network. There's a project for creating the financial models and incentives needed to get the whole MedMij program flying. Alongside this, MedMij also started out by putting MedMij already to practice to get and learn from implementer feedback. And it's very good to know that besides these, MedMij is also doing a lot of effort in actually raising awareness and creating the right culture for MedMij, and also provide a lot of fact sheets, and all kinds of documentation that help organizations in their change management to enable, personnel data exchange. So I'm going to go through the framework, standardization, and finance model, and also a little bit about the practice. Starting with, again, MedMij does not create an implementation guide, but I think that's clear for now, or does not create a personal health environment. So we will go through the MedMij framework, which is again made to make sure that the data exchange is in a safe and easy way. And the whole reason why we would need MedMij, or one of the important reasons MedMij created the framework, is to solve the many-to-many connections. Because if we have so many personal health record suppliers and they need to connect to all healthcare providers, you will have like many-to-many connections that will limit innovation and will definitely increase the costs. So what MedMij does is, MedMij is going to sit in the middle with the framework and let everyone connect through those service providers we talked in the beginning. In this framework, all the roles of all the parties are clearly described, and agreements are made on a lot of things like architecture, which information standards, legal stuff, and parties in the MedMij framework actually need to sign for it. Next to that, it also have a very clear, or it has a clear governance model that is also maintained and secured over time. So once the whole MedMij project is finished, this should live on its own and would have its own cyclus and maintenance and governance. We call it the MedMij framework. In the Netherlands, it's het afsprakenstelsel. And you can find it on there. And I think if you print it out by now, you will have like a very, very big book of agreement. So let's go through the actions that are available in the MedMij, in the framework at the moment. I think this is a bit of an old slide, but they're still, I think, representative for what it is, what's currently possible. So a healthcare provider should register itself, and one of the options is that it can do so. It can also register a QR code, which a patient, when it is at the healthcare facility, can scan the code and will be able to find the healthcare provider in its PHR. Well, you can subscribe to healthcare data. So when something is new or added or changed, you will be notified of it. That actually is also point 6. It belongs to each other. Of course, you need to authenticate and authorize yourself. So there are use cases for it covered in the framework. And I think the two most important ones is actually to retrieve healthcare data and to share healthcare data with a healthcare provider. So now I've got a next slide on the architecture, which I will cover briefly, of MedMij, which is maybe a lot of information on one slide. And here it is. So we have here on the left side, we have again the person domain, and on the right side, we have the healthcare provider domain. And I will briefly go through a couple of important actors in this framework, which are the PHR server, the authorization server, and the resource server. So the PHR server and the resource server, that's the two servers that actually connect or exchange FHIR data with each other. And the authorization server is used, of course, for authorization and authentication of patients, which also uses DigiD, which is an identity server in the Netherlands, being used for a lot of things, also by the government. What's good to know is that MedMij tries to keep this whole architecture as decentralized as possible, but it needs to have a couple of administration things under its control, which are those 4 things at the bottom, which are actually Dutch abbreviations. So we got the ZAL, which is a healthcare provider list of a healthcare provider registry, which is used by the PHR server to know where a healthcare provider is found and what its endpoint is. Then we have the GNL, which is a list of all the information standards a healthcare provider is capable of exchanging or receiving. So that's also needed to know what kind of data can be retrieved or sent. We have the whitelist, which allows or shows every trusted healthcare server in the network. And we have the OAuth client list, which is used to provide a nice human-readable name for the OAuth token in the PHR, so you can authorize the right healthcare provider. So I'm very happy to go through this architecture like later on or in the hands-on session, but so far is this. So this was the framework. Now we're going to the standardization, because in the beginning we talked about all the places where your healthcare data is stored, which probably for a lot of people is a lot. And then if that's not only the problem is that all of those information is stored in different ways and it's also not possible to retrieve them in the same way. So everyone has their own plugs, which is represented by all the unique plugs. And it's not possible to just easily connect them all to your personal health record. So this is the situation we would like to have, but that's not as easy, because that's why we're doing stuff with FHIR and we're here at DevDays and like this whole interoperability problem. So this is where information standards come in. When we're looking for which information standards we're going to use within MedMij, we are first exploring the healthcare landscape, and we were going to look to those systems, and we're going to research how the information is stored, which information, how is it coded, how is it exchanged. And for that, we will, in the end, for MedMij, create use cases, create a data set, terminology and code systems, and choose a communication standard for it to make it a proper information standard usable for MedMij. Well, as a communication standard, like I already said before, we're using MedMij, or we're using FHIR STU3. Well, I need to say that the whole very strong ambition of MedMij is to not create information standards ourselves. So we're really exploring the field and we're checking what's in there, what's usable. But what we see is that a lot of information standards currently don't have a FHIR component or don't have a component for exchanging data with a patient. So therefore, MedMij will go in and will help develop, or will develop the FHIR component, or the component usable for exchanging the data in the MedMij network. So in the end, we try to not make information standards ourselves, because then we end up with a lot of them. So currently, we have published a lot of types of information that is possible to exchange within MedMij. Unfortunately, I will not have time to go through them one by one, but I think a good one to mention is the BGZ. I will show an example for it. The BGZ is actually the Dutch patient summary. It stands for Basisgegevensetzorg in Dutch. And for the hands-on session, we also have, you can try out certain things with medication, which is based on the information standard medication process 9, version 9. And what is the other one? We also have some things for appointments where you can play around with. So to talk a little bit on how we are creating the FHIR components or the FHIR parts usable for MedMij. In the beginning, we first set out to write down all of our mapping principles. So we decided on which language our standards would be. We wrote down our naming conventions, how our canonicals should look like, and also how our profiles should look like. Would they be open or closed model? And then when we are working on our profiles, we actually work closely with HL7 Netherlands. A lot of participants that wanted to participate in MedMij or within expert groups. And of course, we bombarded the Zulip chat with a lot of questions about how to model things. And very important to note is that before MedMij, we had another program called Registration at the Source, which created a lot of logical functional models, like how, for example, a patient would look like. I will go into them, I will show them later on. But there are a lot of our profiles and information standards are based on that, on the results of that program. So to briefly note, we use GitHub as our working repository, which is synced to Simplifier for the visualization of our profiles. And we create FHIR specifications in the way of implementation guide on information standaarden of informatiestandaarden.nictus.nl. So I just briefly talked about the registration at the source. They create building blocks as well, and from there we started with creating our FHIR profiles. And what we saw from those information models from that program, a lot of them were easily mapped to a FHIR component. For example, patient maps to patient. But however, it wasn't clear for all resources. So along that process, for example, for the BGZ, that's one of the first information standards we looked at, we encountered around 45 issues, where 25 were on the side for the healthcare information models in the Netherlands and 20 for the FHIR side. So we issued a lot of tracker items. And while we started at Days 2.2, now we're at STU3, so a lot of our changes were actually incorporated in STU3, which was a nice result. So we'll just briefly go to how we made the BGZ work for MedMij, or the patient summary, the BGZ. Because here you see the BGZ, it's in Dutch, but it's a data set of 26 healthcare information models. So on the top you've got like patient data, which is the patient model, and it goes on. And on the right side is actually the content that should be in the model when you exchange it in terms of when you request the patient summary. So for each of these 26 models, we made a profile, and we also thought of on how to exchange those data. So we needed to create search URLs and so forth. So here we have the logical model for a patient from registration at the source. You have these all have concepts which were able to map them to a FHIR profile. So on the right side, you see our patient profile, and now on the left side, you will see the list of concepts from the functional model, and we just mapped them all to a FHIR profile, created a FHIR profile, and on Simplifier, it's possible to show, to view which concept is mapped to which FHIR element. And we did this for all the healthcare information models. Next to that, we wrote functional use cases and technical use cases and worked them out on our wiki pages. And actually the starting point for people in MedMij would be the afsprakenstelsel or the framework. Then you will be guided to the functional use cases, and eventually you will end up in the technical side, which is the FHIR side actually. So at the functional level, at the first page, we created patient journeys, which you see here. You see here patient journey from Thomas van Beek. We've written down like how he goes through the healthcare landscape and encounters different kinds of checks, or all the blue things are encounters with the healthcare world, and the green things are standards that belong to it. And when you click on it, you will get to the functional use case of those standards. So for example, if he checks his BGZ sample, you will get to the functional use case, which are mostly very simple, because it's just retrieve my data or send my data, which is, well, you get a kind of functional model like this. And then when you end up in the technical part, we have worked out a lot of FHIR things. So we have capability statements for every of those use cases, which shows how a server or client should look like in terms of FHIR. We provide for all those 26 sections of the BGZ how to retrieve that certain part of information. So on the right side you have the search URLs, and we also provide all the FHIR profiles that we made, again based on the the healthcare information models, which are these, and on the right side you have the FHIR resources where they're mapped to, and the link to the FHIR profile. And this is actually something where you can try out in the hands-on sessions, because we will offer you a authorization token for a BGZ patient, and you can go through like the wiki page and try to retrieve the whole patient summary of BGZ. You can do this with your own client, or you can do this with Postman. It's one of the things we have at the hands-on. So we're almost there. First, briefly go through the finance project. what we see is that making the healthcare data available to a patient, it can be seen as a means at its own, but next to that, it will also provide a lot of benefits for, well, in terms of money and in terms of health gain. And that's mostly based off all the functionalities that can be built upon all the healthcare data. So MedMij also did a lot of research on this before MedMij really started. And one of those researchers showed that MedMij can actually save a lot of money in the course over 10 years when healthcare data is present. And this is mainly through self-management programs that can be made available once a patient has all healthcare data. However, if we look at those finances, we see that if we want to make this available, first a lot of stakeholders need to pay for it, and then at the end, other group of stakeholders will benefit from it. So that's not real fair. So what the government needs to do is to make sure that we can fund the first ones in their costs. So we need to even it out, and therefore the whole finance project did a lot of research on how to properly make financial incentives. And it actually comes down to the fact that we have currently temporary impulse financing, which will be followed by long-term sustainable structural funding. And this is needed because we first need to get MedMij from the ground, because we need to have healthcare data available, and we also need to have personal health records available, and that needs to come up. So that the whole temporary impulse finding is to get that running, and then the whole model needs to grow before it can spin on its own. And like I said, the whole funding is already in progress. So we now have the impulse financing just released a couple of months for all the PHR records in the Netherlands, and I think only 25 PHR records registered for it, and they can earn, or they can get money up front, and then after a year they need to prove that they build in at least 4 information standards which are applicable within MedMij. So PHR records are actually currently building a lot of these firework. Nice. And alongside that, we also have financial incentives for healthcare providers. That goes broader than only MedMij, because we have a lot of different incentives for making data available. So healthcare providers can also get money when they build a portal, and well, that's a lot broader than MedMij, but those financial incentives also cover MedMij, and they're on a different in different categories of health. So the last project is a very short one about MedMij in practice. So alongside the development of MedMij, we started out with putting MedMij to practice using kickstarts in the beginning. There was a real small peer-to-peer proof of concepts where we can get feedback on our implementation, on our information standards. And since 2018, MedMij scaled it up, and we have now the project proofs in place, which is actually testing the whole framework in certain routes. And they will provide feedback to mostly the framework, but now also for the information standards. So I got the next slide from proofs, which is maybe a little bit too much information, but it just goes, the whole purpose when I want to show this slide is because I want to show that there are a lot of parties actually putting small bits of the framework and MedMij into practice. So on the left side we have all the PHRs, and on the right side we have the service providers for the healthcare providers with the actual backend system. And you see all the information, they're all testing a little part of the framework or information standards. Here I got a slide with all logos of all kinds of personal health record providers in the Netherlands, which are actually, and probably there are already a lot more than these on the slide, but this is just to give you a glimpse on how many personal health records vendors there are already available in the Netherlands. Well, time to get to DevDays again, because we can get it practical. We brought a lot of exercises Like I said in the beginning, we have a MedMij compliant FHIR server where we can release a lot of patient data for it. We have the qualification environment we will use to qualify those personal health records and also healthcare providers if they implemented our FHIR implementation or our FHIR profiles and in the right way, or if they're exchanging the data in our FHIR compliant way. And that's done with Touchstone. And we also have Fecoso who's participating in the proofs session with a sandbox gateway. And in collaboration with FHIR, they allow you with the testing environment to actually retrieve medication from our Dutch national exchange point, which is fun, based on the certificate which will be used in MedMij and authorization. So we really have a glimpse on how MedMij will work. And of course, we can answer all your MedMij questions. So actually I had a couple of slides on these, what I just said. So we have the wildfire server, which is hosted on Nictus at wildfire.org. We will give you authorization tokens for it, and you can retrieve it with T3's information standards available. We have the Touchstone environment, which we use where we have our test scripts available also for these 3 information standards. And well, we need to give you access to that folder, so that will go, you just point me if you want to explore it. And we have Richard here as well, who is from Aegis, who's the owner of Touchstone. And the Fecoso FHIR gateway. And they actually provided a demo client, which you can look, and there's a lot of actual descriptive text in it. It's really fun to do. You can just get a certification from them, and well, this can be your client or your postman or whatever, and you can just ask, you retrieve medication information all the way from FHIR, so that's pretty cool. What actually would be my dream scenario is if we could connect PHR vendors with healthcare providers here, but I'm just curious, how many people work for a PHR vendor? Are there any in the room? Kind of. Well, and for a healthcare provider? Yeah. Do you think this dream scenario is possible? No.
Scary.
Very scary.
Scary.
Yeah? Okay, I will just move it quickly. So, I'm not sure how we are on time, but we're here now at probably almost here, I hope. I don't think. So, who of you would like to get his hands dirty on FHIR request? Yeah? So, it's okay, I think that will be enough to just fill on the table. That works more practically. So, let's get some hack happiness. Or any questions now, of course. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, what would you classify as a healthcare provider? Because in the early introduction you had all these websites where the citizens go check out themselves different interpretations of their health data. So when you say apps that use MedMij, do you mean actual healthcare providers like hospitals, or do you mean also all kind of third-party apps that could have access to the same data?
Well, I think MedMij uses healthcare provider in a very broad way, but in the end, MedMij only goes about the healthcare provider, service provider for a certain healthcare way. And I think it's a very, I think it's quite some effort to get through the framework, and so I don't think like third-party apps will be easily on the network, but I'm not sure. But it should be a very broad way of, so it should be, in the end, like a lot of healthcare providers kind of should be able to join MedMij. Yeah.
So looking at the XDS, there you have, of course, all kind of networks, and as I understand, and didn't get that before, but you have a network and you have a repository with a list of servers that are connected to the MedMij network, right?
Yes.
So then you have a list of servers, but what is your vision or your roadmap to include maybe an index of where to find which patient?
So.
Well, that's what XDS does, right?
Uh-huh. Okay. So, what, can you repeat the question again? Because I'm not sure if I get.
So do you see anything in the roadmap to include some kind of an index? Well, if I would want my data, would I go through all the connected servers, or?
Well, probably you will need to find your own healthcare provider where you know your data is. So that's what can be done with the QR code, or you can look up your healthcare data in the beginning. So the PHR server will have the list from MedMij, which has all the healthcare providers now in MedMij. So as a patient, you need to select your healthcare provider.
Right.
And then there is also the address of the service provider for that healthcare procedure, and then you will be
good to go.
Guided. Yeah.
Right. Okay. No, thanks.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
How does MedMij envision getting app data, so device data like an Apple smartwatch, into this ecosystem?
Well, probably through your personal health record, I would guess. That if you can connect your device data to your personal health record, then it's stored, and once you want to exchange it with the healthcare provider, then it will flow through MedMij. But MedMij is only concerned about how to transfer healthcare data between those parties. So
okay, but then you're dependent on either the Apple device, for example, sending it as FHIR messages or making it available in FHIR format to these personal health environments, or these vendors all need to make adapters for every kind of device. So you're just shifting a part of the problem away. Because then you will still have many to many. Because if all these vendors don't talk FHIR, you will still have many to many, because each personal health environment needs to have an adapter for every different device.
True. Already have some aggregators. So there are platforms that aggregate data from Fitbit and from Apple and from into something. You only have to connect to that one.
Yeah, probably.
So that's the thing for PHRs, right?
Probably it's also to limit the scope a bit, because if you're trying to tackle the whole interoperability world, then it's also a thing. So maybe that's something for the future MedMij as well.
Yeah, maybe to add to that from maybe a slightly different, less technical perspective. I work at the Ministry of Health, and we are one of the founders of the MedMij program. And we try to take a very pragmatic approach to the development of the MedMij framework and start with what's already out there, instead of starting with the ideal situation, which of course is what you're all referring to. But that's just too far away to start. So what we're doing is start with the 1.0 version of the framework, and the standards that are out there is what's already being used and out there now. And there's a roadmap that adds new features and adds new use cases to the MedMij system time and time again. And MedMij is one part, a very important part of our national strategy to come to a more interoperable healthcare system. And this is one of the main breakthrough things that we use to get things moving and to get a new dynamic into the system that wasn't there yet. All in all, one of the financial incentives that we're putting into place now from the ministry is that for the next 3 or 4 years, we're investing €500 million into getting the data freed from all these silos within these healthcare systems and out into systems like PHRs or other things as well. It's all in all, you have the VIP programs and you have MedMij, you have registration at the source, and all in all, if you add them up, it's about €490 million for the next 3 years. So that's quite a significant investment that we're doing.
Well, thank you. Lloyd.
When you created your Dutch-specific profiles, how much did you look at other national profiles like Argonaut or Australia Core, that kind of thing?
Well, we did. For a lot of things, we definitely look first starting international. For example, our whole e-appointment, e-afspraak, is almost similar to the appointment thing based on Argonaut or HL7. But for example, for a lot of those things, they are not covered in. A lot of our healthcare information models are not represented in Argonaut or US Core. For our patients, we definitely needed to have our own profile with other stabilities. But we always first started looking outside the Netherlands and try to be aligned as closely as possible. So okay, who's ready to? I am. Yeah, shall we move to the MedMij table? Yeah, cool. Great.